Okay.
Joking.
Sefer Yetzirah is possibly the oldest work of what we call Kabbalah today. And some people think it was authored by Avram Avinu. And other people think it was authored in the time of the Tanaim or the Amoraim by somebody like that, like I'll put out there, I think Rava and Reb Zera, there was a story about, I believe Rava made a golem and he sent it to Reb Zera as a joke. So that was their sense of humor back then. So somebody like that, somebody who, now let's just for one moment explain why people would say it was made by Avram Avinu, is the Rambam says that Avram Avinu was a great philosopher, and the Rashi also says the Medrash says he was a great astrologer, and he was also known to be somebody who brought people into the knowledge of one God. So you've got philosophy, astronomy, the equivalent of science, and the unity of one God. You put them all together, you have Sefer Yetzirah. That's really what Sefer Yetzirah is all about. Okay. Now, I think there's a theory right now by a fellow named Tzachi Weiss. He's the one who put out a full-length book on his theory of when and where the Sefer Yetzirah was written. Now, he doesn't have a name of a person.
What's his theory?
His theory is that it was written in the 7th century in a environment of Syriac Christian thinkers, because he finds many parallels and ideas that were widespread at that time in that context.
But he says it was written by Christians?
No, Jews, by Jews.
Jews.
He doesn't think.
7th century?
He says a few very controversial things. I don't subscribe to his
But the guy who
theory.
brought it to light was from Spain, right?
No, that's the Zohar. You're talking about the Zohar.
Right.
You're talking about the Sefer Yetzirah.
You're right.
So the reason he says that the author wasn't trying to conceal anything. I totally think that that's bogus. The author is clearly trying to conceal many things. So I don't buy that, and I also don't buy. He was saying that the person wrote so many things that were not typical in a Jewish context. Like it would be like saying nobody from Borough Park would write like that. So clearly the guy had to be from India. Like that's the theory is based on that. So. Again, there are great professors of history of Kabbalah, such as Moshe Idel, who we actually had a day of Kabbalah a few years ago on the Sefer Yetzirah, and he said, I have no idea. He's familiar with Tzachi Weiss's work, and he does not buy it. So what I'm going to say is one of the reasons why I picked the Graz version. There's different versions. There's the Sadia version that was printed. That Sadia, it's not necessarily that he made that version, but that's the version that was
different text.
Yes, of the same book, different lengths and so on. There's the short version. There's the long version. There's the Sadia version, the Graz version. The reason why I like the Gra, not so much the version that he has specifically, but his commentary as well as the version, is that I believe that the Sefer Yetzirah might be the closest thing we have to the Kabbalah of the Maisa Bereshis. The Gemara says that there's two schools of mystery tradition. One is called the mystery of creation, and the other is called the Maisa Merkava, the mystery of the Merkava that Yecheskel saw in the first chapter. And the Mishnah in Chagiga and the Gemara talk about Perek Ein Darshan, the chapter about who you're allowed to teach and who you're not allowed to teach. So I've spoken a little bit before about different theories of how to understand what exactly Maaseh Merkava is and Maaseh Bereishis. But one of the things that you could say, arguably, is that there's a lot of quotes in the Sefer Yetzirah that seem like the person was coming out of the period in the Talmud that they did describe certain aspects of the mystery schools or things in the Gemara in general. And to put a perspective on it is, it could be that if you read very closely the Tanaim and Amoraim, that some of those Tanaim and Amoraim had a school of thought that some little bit of it became part of the Gemara, but 98% of it never became part of the Gemara. So, for example, Rabbi Akiva knew the mysteries of creation, because we know that he went down into the Pardes, right? Where does he talk about those things? Well, once in a while he reveals little hints, right? So, for example, he says every holiday in the Torah has a thing that we want from God, and the mitzvah that we do on that holiday is reminiscent of creating a synergy between us and God to have access to that thing we want from God.
What are those things?
So the most famous of them is Tamlichuni Aleichem, that we want to make God our king on Rosh Hashanah. It's the end of a medrash that's brought down in the Gemara. And how do we do that? We do that through the shofar. The point is, if you learn closely the Gemara, you can start arguably saying, is that there were like these wisdom schools that never became revealed, but little bits and pieces of them became revealed. So very possibly
They didn't write any books.
Meaning they didn't fully reveal because they were being quoted in the Gemara, and their particular schools were like the way Moshe Idel explains it. Because I think I had a conversation with him about it. Is I think there's a whole mysticism in the Gemara, and he says no. What it is the particular Tanaim and Amoraim had their own mystical schools. But it never. But they taught it to their students, and not any one of them developed it into the Gemara itself. You might have had a hint of it here because you have like these sayings of Rabbi Akiva, these sayings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You have these little sayings, or Rabbi Yochanan, Bar Shlakish. All of these like little sayings. They're hinting to a whole world that they taught 98 things that weren't in there.
How does they know that? How does he know that?
Because it's clear that they talk about having access to Maaseh Merkava and Maaseh Bereishis. Where is it revealed? It isn't revealed.
Wait, the Gemara says that?
Yeah. The Gemara talks about which ones of them knew about Maaseh Bereishis and Maaseh Merkava. So that we know they knew about it, unless it's making it up. So it means but they didn't teach it to everyone, because they said you're not allowed to. So they taught it to whatever few Talmidim they did. Anyway, that's my theory, not mine alone. I'm saying that's a theory that Avraham Avinu could have been the inspiration of the Sefer Yetzirah, but it was actually made by a Tana, or more likely an Amora, of one of these schools. Okay. Now, that's the background for it. It's more of a mystery than... The bottom line is we don't know. We don't know who the author is. That's one of the things that there's theories. The early sources like to say Avraham Avinu, and so on. Okay. Now let's take a look at the text itself. So it's 6 chapters. It's very dense, and it begins in chapter 1 by saying there are 32 paths. The word for a path is used sometimes for a sea lane, which is interesting. Right now we have this Hormuz, which is the blocking of a sea lane, right? So there are these 32 paths of wisdom that are pliot. Pliot is like wondrous.
And what's the noun that's used?
B'shloshim b'shtayim netivot.
Nitivot.
Netivot.
Nitivot is paths.
It's paths, yeah. But it's like Hanosim b'yam derech u'v'mayim azim nesivot. Who said that? Somebody knows the verses here. Very good, very good. Okay. So Chakak Yud Hey Hashem Tzvakot Alekei Yisrael Lekim Chai Melech Olam. God engraved, but it uses these different words for the name of God. And goes on with these descriptives of God as the King of the world, the God of that makes things up to a point, Rachum, Chanan, compassionate, gracious, exalted, high, dwells in eternity, sanctified is his name, exalted and holy is his name. So with all of this exaltedness of God, he created the world with Shlosha Svarim, with 3 books. What are the 3 books? The Sefer, one is with a text, the Safar with numbers, and Sipor with a story.
Wow.
So the text is going to be the Aleph base, the 22 letters of the Aleph base. The numbers are going to be the 10 Sephirot. And the story is... The beauty of this is it's not just a science. It is a type of a mystical science. And the mystical science is going to be the idea of creation being based on words. We already know in the Talmud. The Talmud says, Ba'asara mamarot, nivra olam. It's a Mishnah, and Pirkei Avot, it's in Megillah as well, that God created the world with 10 utterances. So that pronouncement becomes the springboard for the Sefer Yetzirah to really mine the idea of God's language being the force of creation. Now what he's going to do is he's going to talk about a linguistic understanding that will somehow lead from one God to the world as we know it. Okay. Now, he jumps right in. Next Mishnah, and it's called either, a lot of people call it the Mishnah or Halacha, which is interesting because it's so dense that it's considered like a Mishnah. Like a Mishnah needs interpretation. Eser Sephirot B'lima, V'esrim V'shtayim Otyot. There are 10 Sephirot of no thingness, and there are 22 letters. Yesod Shalosh Imot, if you break it down, you have 3 mother letters, meaning they're more primary. Sheva Kfulot, 7 doubles, which he'll explain at the end of this chapter and the beginning of next chapter. V'shtayim Esep Pshutot, and 12 simpler or elemental letters. That's the breakdown of the 22 letters. And now in Mishnah Gimel, he continues. Eser Sefirot B'lima, B'misper Eser Etzbot Chamesh Keneged Chamesh. The number of 10 Sefirot of no thingness is in the amount of 10 fingers, 5 that correspond to 5, right hand and left hand. Ubrit Yachid Mechuvan Be'emsa. And the covenant, that singular, is specifically in the middle, B'milot halashon v'milot hama'ar, both in the circumcision of the tongue and the circumcision of the male part of the body.
What was compared to circumcision on this?
In the middle of the 10 Sefirot,
Right.
the balance between them is the tongue, the mouth,
Right.
and the male sexual organ.
What do you mean balance?
Okay, good question. What does that mean? It's like a scale somehow. Okay, so let's talk about for a moment the 10 Sephirot here. There's a contradiction in terms. In 10, Belima, which have no quality that you can qualify, that you can limit. And that's the mystery of creation, is that you have 10 Sephirot, but in the way the Ramak explains, are the 10 Sephirot Elokut? Are they divine? Or are they Kalim? Are they just like the vessels that God uses? Like craftsperson uses a tool to create the artistry that he's going to build, but he or she is the artist. So what are the 10 Sephirot? Are the 10 Sephirot God's vessels, or are they God? And there's actually a debate amongst the Kabbalists which one it is.
So
And
form or content?
yeah, something to those lines, and comes along the Ramak and comes along with the interesting answer, which is the Sephirot have two parts of them, the Or and the Kli, the light and the vessel. So the light is Elokut, is divine, and the vessel is a vessel.
Is there a reason?
Yeah, but it's already in the Ramak. So
Yeah, I know
Ramak is
that,
yeah. And so, okay, so it's Mekubal.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, before we get into what the 10 Sephirot are, because we all know what the 10 Sephirot are according to the Arizal, according to the Ramak, which is based on the Zohar, and here it's not clear that it's the 10 Sephirot. Of course, the commentators, like the Gra, like the Ramak, are going to fit in the 10 Sephirot of the Sefer Yetzirah with the 10 Sephirot of the Zohar and the Ari. But it's still not definitively understood from the text itself to be that way. So, why, like Danny asked, does it have this mechuvan be'emsa, this thing right in the middle of the Brit HaLashon, or Brit HaMa'or, the circumcision of the Brit Milah, the circumcision of the mouth? Now, what is the circumcision of the mouth? We know there's a circumcision of the male organ, but what's the mouth? So the circumcision of the mouth means that we're supposed to say certain things and not supposed to say other things. Shmir talasham, supposed to guard our mouth. Now, technically, that would make it 11 Sephirot. So the Ramak, for example, works out some of the details. He says, first of all, the emphasis of repeating 10 in this paragraph, in this Mishnah, is to say that they're actually 10. And maybe one way of saying the two hands is one hand represents the creation of heaven and the other hand represents the creation of earth. So perhaps you could divide the Sephirot into higher Sephirot that represent heavenliness and lower Sephirot that represent earthliness. And there's different ways to divide it in that way. Usually in Lurianic Kabbalah we say you have the upper Sephirot are the Keter, Chachma, and Bina, and then the lower Sephirot are the Sephirot below them, and starting with Chesed, and the lower is Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. And of course Malchut is the lowest.
There's also division.
But there's other ways of dividing it.
Right and left, right?
There's right and left, center, but here we're dividing it. Okay, so now that you mentioned right and left, he mentioned right hand and left hand. So if you want to divide it into right and left, for example, we said Chesed is on the right, and Gvur is on the left. Netzach is on the right, Hod is on the left. Some equivalent of that, we would divide. There's different ways to configure it so that you have right and left. And that's why he would say you have, even though you have 10, and they're represented by the fingers, you also have, for example, Tiferet. Tiferet is usually the center. But here he's bringing in another concept, which is instead of seeing what we call Tiferet as the center, the language as the center. Why is language the center? Because he's trying to, again, what is he trying to do? He's trying to connect the 10 and the 22. He's trying to explain how creation of the world requires numbers and letters. And they somehow have to come together to calibrate themselves for creation to take place. And he's going to explain it. So, again, the tongue could be Tiferet, which we usually describe in its biological metaphor as the chest, or the torso, but what's clear is it's the center of the body. And the way the Ramak puts it is he gives a mashal of the shofar. If you think of the tongue goes down. I don't know enough about the tongue. How low do you guys, the doctors, know? How far down into your throat does your tongue go?
The root of it.
You don't know. You don't want to know these things. But the Ramak describes it. Yeah.
Of the larynx.
Okay, which is where exactly in your throat? Somewhere in your throat.
Above the Adam's.
So he's saying, think of it as a shofar. It starts here, and you're not literally in your chest, but like it's coming out of your throat into your mouth is like the larynx and everything. Think of it as like a shofar coming out of you. So that's a mashal he gives. Take it or leave it. It's an interesting metaphor he gives. So. Another thing is, by the way, he mentions that the 10 fingers also could be said to be the 10 toes. And that could represent each 10th time you have 10 Sephirot, it manifests in a lower world as well, with some more limited version of what it is in the higher world. So like, if you look at your foot, it's like your hand, but it's not, the dexterity is lacking. Yeah. So he said that's a good metaphor for that. Now the covenant of the circumcision, the Ramak puts forward several possible interpretations of pretty much all of these words in the Sefer Yetzirah. And in a way, the Ramak uses the Sefer Yetzirah in a way that's more primary than the Zohar. Meaning he sees the Zohar as, if you could give the expression, like a Gemara compared to Sefer Yetzirah, which is the Mishnah. Like the Zohar, in a way, is more of an interpretation of the Sefer Yetzirah. Because he sees the Sefer Yetzirah, first of all, being earlier, and second of all, being more compact, and the Zohar being more elaborate. So I'm not saying in all respects does he say Mishnah and Gemara, but in some respects he sees that as a good description. As I mentioned before, the Kabbalists, including the Ramak, felt it was necessary to integrate the Kabbalah of the Ari. I'm sorry, not the Kabbalah of the Ari, because the Ramak was alive during the time of the Ari, but he didn't really hear the Ari teach, because he was kind of the Ari's teacher, if at all. But I think the Ari attended one or two of his classes, so to speak. They overlapped for just maybe a couple months before he passed away in Sfat. So the Ramak is again integrating the teachings of the Sefer Yetzirah with the Zohar, and he has an unparalleled ability to interpret each word of the Sefer Yetzirah in a way that fits in with the Kabbalistic understanding of the Zohar.
Where's that written?
It's in Pardes Rimonim. He spends a lot of time unpacking parts of Sefer Yetzirah. And Pardes Rimonim is again the encyclopedia of Kabbalah that's seen as an unparalleled kind of work, definitely from that time and before, that takes different Kabbalistic teachings and compares them and analyzes them and explains them.
Is it like an encyclopedia that has a different entry on each word?
Not like an encyclopedia that is not alphabetical like that, but it's encyclopedic in nature.
Right.
Yeah. Now he says, for example, it says 10 not 9 and 10 not 11. He says, because some people want to say that Keter is God, that the divine will is God. It's not separate from God. There isn't God. That is like that the first of the 10 Sephirot is God himself. And he says, no.
Who says no?
The Ramak says no. Keter is not God. God is
All 10.
God is above all 10. And manifests in all 10, but he should not be confused as being the first of the 10. But some Kabbalists disagree with him, and he vehemently rejects them, and he uses the Sefer Yetzirah as one of his reasons to reject them. The infinite one is part of the 10, but is also transcends them. And he does not agree with the people who say that Keter Elyon is Ein Sof or even beyond that. Anyway, we continue with the next Mishnah, with Mishnah 4. Eshes Sephirot Lima. Oh, that's that we were just quoting it. 10 Sephirot of no thingness. 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. Understand with wisdom, be wise with understanding. Examine with them and probe with them, and make each thing stand on its essence, and make the Creator sit on its base. Now this is again one of those things that are very reminiscent of Talmudic terminology. What Talmudic terminology? Well, first of all, understand with wisdom and be wise with understanding. On a very simple level, is the first time, arguably, that we're seeing very clearly that Judaism is bringing forward a philosophy of mind being able to comprehend something that will fix the world with the way God should be in the world. That there's some system, and he's using the word very specifically, the Chachma and Bina, the two together. So, for example, the way I would understand it, again, I'm biased because I already understand through other schools of what Chachma and Bina is Chachma is an original insight, like what we have in the comic books. Somebody has the light bulb going off. They're getting in, or on, I should say. They're getting an idea, a new idea. And Bina is analytical. But the truth is that they come together. So now if you read it like that, it would be saying like this. Because most people say, I don't really know. I'm thinking. I'm reading. And then I get this like breakthrough. Fella, you're with me?
Yeah. But
the breakthrough usually comes because you're getting the details. So Haven b'chachma, meaning if you really understand, you understand something very deeply,
Then you could be rich.
then original thoughts will also come into you. The original thoughts don't usually come into people who don't think, who don't read, who don't analyze, who don't put things together.
Islam talks about Bina really has two components.
Uh-huh.
The one is really Chachma. It's a vessel.
It's the Chachma in the Bina.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a separate state.
So Haven b'chachma.
And that's why they never separate.
Yeah.
'Cause
Which,
that's
by
why-
the way, a lot of times I can't keep learning something that I have no insight in. I have no chachma in the thing. It's just like I don't really understand it because I have no insight into what's really going
No
on.
traction.
Yeah, haven b'chachma. If you want to have havana, if you want to have true understanding, you have to have the ability to have like a flash of wisdom, a gift. in that area. Otherwise, you get bored of it. V'chakem b'bina. And if you want to know that, don't, and if you're always looking for the thrill of like a new chiddush, don't, because the way to do that is through understanding. So don't say, I'll stop learning, I'll just wait for the chidushim. Because when I'm learning, I'm busy reading other people's chidushim. If I stop learning, God will give me my own chidushim. He says, no. Chakem bebina. You want to have chachma, it comes through an analysis. And then he says, Bachon behem v'chakor behem v'hamid yaval arbayim. He's going to repeat this idea of using chakira. Chakira is a word for analysis. Today, a lot of people in yeshiva use it for Talmudic analysis. When they put forward a chakira, they put forward a question of, can we say X and Y to help us understand, to answer a question in the Talmud. It's more like an answer, but it's a query of, would this be a plausible explanation for something? So we have to use the wisdom of the Sefer Yetzirah to plumb the depth of the understanding of what the world is. And by the way, there were some people who thought this was a scientific text. They thought that the Sefer Yetzirah was saying, here's what you need to know to understand the universe. It's a mystical text. But here's what you have to know to understand the mystical universe. And when you do that, the knowing itself, here's the chiddush, is the knowing itself is going to make things stand on its base. V'hashav yotzer al mechona. You're going to return. So that's reminiscent of an idea in the Gemara, I mentioned Gemara, that when we galu lebavel shchina imahem, we went into exile, into Babylonia, every stage of exile, the divine presence descended with us. And when we're going to go out of exile, we're going to bring the divine presence out of exile with us as well. So here it's a mystical variation of how to reestablish God in His proper. What is mechona? What is God's place? Usually it's the Beit HaMikdash. So what are we saying here? We're seeing a hint of Sefer Yecheskel, which is the vision of the divine chariot when he was leaving Yerushalayim. How could it be? You're leaving Yerushalayim. It's similar to what the Gemara says on Tisha B'Av when the destruction of the temple happened. Those who saw that the two angels were Ma'urim Zebazeh. They were embracing with each other. They were having a moment of intimacy. How could it be? The temple's being destroyed. Because at the same time that the temple's being destroyed, God is revealing Mashiach already at that point. So in this little sentence, he's alluding to the idea of the Kabbalists being able to rectify the world. Okay?
By doing what?
By studying Kabbalah. That's what I'm saying. That's the chiddush of this. It's the first time you have this thing. Study Kabbalah and you'll fix the world. It's not a chiddush, but it's the first time it's said, I think. Right? That's what I think. Maybe it's said earlier. The equivalent of that in the Gemara is Ein LaKadosh Baruch Hu Ela Dalan Amashal Halacha. That you need to manifest God in the world by having halachic conclusion.
You see, again, the Baal Shalom says that when you study Kabbalah, it's not about knowing, it's about transformation. You're
beautiful.
only going to change the world if Kabbalah transforms you. It's not about knowing it.
It's not just knowledge.
It's not knowledge.
Yeah.
It's about transformation.
Yeah. The Hemid Davar Al Bariya, the Hashav Yotzam Mechana. Yeah, this level of knowing is going to change the world. You're going to put everything on its place, meaning it's there's this idea that when you know your place in the world, you're going to be who you are instead of something else or somebody else, because you know your place. And you know something's value in your life, what it really is, you'll value it properly. And ultimately, what is the ultimate recognition of that? God in His place. Mishnah Hey, number 5. Esa Sephirot B'lima, Midas and Esa She'en Lahem Sof.
Wait, sorry, it's referring to humility.
Humility.
Yeah, because
The bittul. Okay.
you have a presence, but you're not going past
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you're supposed to do.
Okay. Good. 10 spheres of no thingness. Their measurement are 10 that have no end, a depth of beginning, a depth of the end, like Rashis and Achris, like in like Sof Ma'aseh Machshavat Tchila, we say God's final act was what went up in his original intention. A depth of goodness, a depth of evilness, a depth of height, a depth of lowness, a depth of east, a depth of west, a depth of north, a depth of south. So we're going to basically say that you could find the 10 Sephirot mentioned here. The beginning and the end. So for example, you could say the beginning is Keter, the end is Malchut. Good and bad, Chachma and Bina. I don't know if bad is Bina. Then the 6 directions. So the 6 directions, up and down, north, west, south, east, are the 6 Sephirot of Chesed through Yisod. And God is ruling all of them from his holy dwelling place for all of eternity. Then number 6, Esa Sephirot bli mat v'atan kemar habazek. Their vision is like the appearance of lightning, and their end has no limit. And his word are in ratzah b'shov, are in running to go closer to God and returning. And to his sayings, they have they're running after them. And they're bowing before your throne of glory. So again, this is reminiscent of what we call Maaseh Merkavah, the work of the chariot. Some of these are quotes from various sources, such as the first chapter of Yecheskel, Kamar Habazek, like the appearance of lightning, and Ratzov V'Shov, like we say, V'Achayat Ratzov V'Shov. Next one, 7. The 10 Sephirot of no thingness, their end is embedded in the beginning, and the beginning of the end, like we say in the Chadodi. Right, Sof Ma'aseh Machshavat Tchila. Sha'adon Yachid ve'en lo sheni lifnei achad ma'ata sofer. That there's a singular master, and there is no second, and before one, what can you count? Mishnah 8, 10 Sephirot of no thingness. Balom picha meladaber. Keep your mouth shut and your thoughts from thinking. Again, because this is Kabbalah, you're supposed to keep it a secret, not overly get into this if you're not in the level. But if your mouth runs to talk about it and your heart is thinking about it, then you have to come back. If you're drawn out of yourself, you have to return to yourself. That's what he says in Yecheskel, B'Achayat Ratzah V'Shov, and the Chayot, which is a type of angel, were running and returning. First chapter of Yecheskel, verse 14. Regarding this, a covenant was made. Number 9, 10 Sephirot of no thingness. One is the breath of the living God. Blessed be He, is His name. I'm skipping a little bit. Number 10 is Shtaim Ruach Ruach. 2 is breath from breath. With it he engraved and carved 22 foundation letters, 3 mothers, 7 doubles, and 12 elementals. It's the breakdown of the 22 letters. And 1 breath is from them. So first you have the first Sphira, which is pre-language. to quote, I believe it's the Maggid of Mizrich, and there's a similar quote in the Arizal, is what's the difference between the Gemara says, we only see 9 out of 10 times it says, Vayomer Elokim, Yehi. God said, let there be. But there's no 10th utterance, and the Gemara says, Bereshis, the first verse of Genesis, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, the different ways to translate that, is also an utterance. So the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid, and based on the Arizal say, the difference between the first utterance is the first utterance was not yet Dibur with language. It was it was pre-language, Bereshis bar Elokim es. In the beginning God created Aleph through Taf. So similarly, in a similar vein, the Sefer Yetzirah is saying, the first of the 10 Sephirot is before language. There's no language yet. Then the second is the 22 letters are being formed. And then the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, the sixth will be creating out of those words a world. And most of the next things he's going to say is what's going to create the 6 extremities, as we call them, the dimensions, the 4-dimensional world that we live in. So, Mishnah 11:3 is water from breath. He engraved and carved the 22 letters from Tov Avo, chaos and void, mire and clay. He engraved them like a sort of garden. He carved them like a sort of wall. He covered them like a sort of ceiling. So he created this cube, so to speak. And he poured snow over them, and it became dust. And it is written, for snow, he said, become earth. Mishnah 12. 4 is fire from water. With it he engraved, carved the throne of glory, Seraphim, Ophan, and the holy Chayot, the ministering angels. From these 3 he founded his dwelling, as is written, he makes his angels of breath, his ministers of flaming fire. Mishnah 13. He chose 3 letters from among the elementals, and the mystery of the 3 mothers, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. And he set them in his great name, and with them he sealed 6 extremities. 5 he sealed above and faced upward, and sealed it with Yud. Hey Vav, that's Yud Hey Vav. And then 6 he sealed below and faced downward, and sealed it with Hey. Yud Vav, Hey Yud Vav. It's the same 3 letters in different configurations. 7 he sealed east and faced straight ahead, and sealed it with Vav, Yud, Hey. 8 he sealed west and faced backwards, and sealed it with Vav, Yud, Hey, Yud. 9 he sealed south and faced it to the right, and sealed it with Yud, Vav, Hey. 10 he sealed north and faced it to the left, and sealed it with Hey, Vav, Yud. So again, he's reiterating this idea of creating the 6 up and down, north, south, east, and west. These are the 10, Mishnah 11, these are the 10 Sephirot of no thingness, Ruach Elokim, Chaim, Ruach Meruach, Mayim Meruach, Eish Memayim. These are all indicative of the words we use in the creation that the Medrash already talks about, and early other Kabbalistic sources, that extracting from the story of creation in Genesis, this kind of, so the creation out of the disorder, coming from the chaos to the order. Anyway, that is the end of chapter 1, and that's it. Time for Meyer.